السيدات والسادة الحضور الكرام، نبدأ الآن الجلسة الرابعة والأخيرة تحت عنوان Building the Right Employer Branding Designing a Good Framework of Work. ويدير الجلسة مس سونيا سمير Principal Consultant Egypt Mercer بمشاركة المتحدثين Mr. Ben Leon Director and Head of ATTF Services at the House of Training in Luxembourg, Ms. Hidayat السيد Chief People and Procurement Officer Tally for Digital Payments, Ms. إيمان حسين Head of Talent and People Capabilities Vodafone Egypt. فليتفضلوا جميعا لبدء الجلسة.
So, hello everybody. The good news is it's the last panel and then you can have dinner. So it's a pleasure to be here, and we've really learned a lot of insights from the previous panels, and I'm sure that this panel is just going to be like engulfing everything we've learned in the previous discussions. I have with us a great panel. I'd like to introduce first Hidayat Said. She's the Chief People and Procurement Officer at Tally for Digital Payments, which is a subsidiary of Banque du Caire. She's got over 20 years of experience in human resources, people and culture, business partnerships, and she's worked in industries such as banking, technology, and education. We also have Ms. Iman Samir. She is the head of capabilities at Vodafone Egypt. She's also got 20 years of experience in HR and building branding, learning and development. And she's also worked in industries such as the banking and the telecom. And we also have Ben, who's flown in from Luxembourg, especially to be with us today. He is the head of ATTF. I will keep it simple, you can explain more. At the House of Training, yes? So he's been working in financial services and financial training. So our panel is all about employee branding. So we've been hearing about leadership, we've been hearing about what's important in the future. What we're aiming at is to understand how the future of work should be seen from an HR perspective. So I think what we're really looking at now is how the employee sees the organization. So it's not all about the standard things we've been seeing before. So before it was all about if I want to join an organization or if I'm going to stay in an organization, it's about the compensation, it's about traditional training. No, it's no longer about that. It's about the whole employee value proposition. So employees are now looking at what is the organization giving me today? And today, the workforce is changing and it's looking at different things. So I'll start off with Iman. Iman is an expert in branding. So tell us a little bit, Iman, about employer branding. Vodafone is well known as a great brand. I actually saw on your website the spirit of Vodafone. So please tell us a little bit about branding, employer branding.
Employer branding is, it has the word brand. So it always should resonate with your brand as an organization. So, and this is how you will see it in Vodafone. Maybe it's not spelled in a direct way of like something or a certain message that you say clearly, but whatever communication that we do is driven by our employer branding strategy. So it is simply, what is your repetition? What is the repetition that you want to convey to everyone externally about who you are? How does employees work every day in your organization? And definitely to be able to do that with honesty, I would say, is that you live internally within your organization what you are communicating externally. So the employee, when they join any organization, they go through many stages. We call it the employee life cycle, more or less, from the hire to retire, as we call it. So from hire, it's the contractual part. So the contractual part is your positioning as an employer is that you pay well, you pay good, you're a top payer, you pay in the medium range within the market. How do you position yourself? And this is based on your reward strategy. So this is the first part on the contractual phase. It's the benefits and the pay, both of them. And again, it is driven by reward strategy. And then it is the experiential. So people start working, they start to experience the company, how things work. What do you as an organization offer to each and every employee? Offer in the sense of well-being, experience, growth, opportunities, scope of work, values, culture. So they do experience this in reality, on ground. And that makes another part that is crucial in building the right brand or the right proposition. It is the experiential. If we fail at the experiential, whatever we would say to the external world would not be true, more or less. And then the last thing is their emotional status within the organization. So the emotional is driven by the purpose. That each and everyone within the organization, they feel a purpose in the job that they deliver. From a very junior job to a very senior job. So even junior jobs, I will give an example in Vodafone. If the call center agent, he does not know how does his job impact the company revenue, he doesn't have a purpose. So he has a very big purpose of customer. And customer is our key hero of the strategy of the company. So that's from an employee life cycle within any organization. It has to be built with a strategy, with a certain narrative that we want to deliver to people. And then comes the employee value proposition that you want to communicate to the world. Who am I? What do I do? What values do I stand for? What culture framework do I work with? Like the spirit that you've mentioned, Sonia, and this is our cultural program. And what is your strategy? Because this will drive how you want to convey the messages, or what are the key messages that you will deliberately communicate externally. Like, I will give an example because it has a very big part of a marketing concept, the employer branding. And it relates to employees, so it's within HR. So this is, the thing that creates actually a gap generally. When I say in my strategy that I am an inclusive culture, that I give opportunity for everyone to thrive, so I do this through deliberate actions and deliberate programs that we do. Like, for instance, we have the Egyptian Gender Alliance. It is an alliance that has so many governmental entities, other multinationals, that we work together to deliver projects to empower women. So this is something that resonates with being inclusive for women. And also we give another program, we announce about another program that it is the returnship program. It is for women who has been away from work for 2 to 5 years for any family reason. and we give them the opportunity to come back and to work again. So these are just small examples. So these are the things that puts us in a position that we are an inclusive culture and we are encouraging inclusive activities from us within the company internally and externally through collaboration with other organizations or doing a solely programs. So when people see this program or any of them, they wouldn't ask about, oh, what's your strategy? But the message is inclusion. That's it. And many, many, many examples that anything that we communicate, it resonates with the value proposition. So the value proposition in general, it should be something that would be appealing for the new generations that, and this topic has been mentioned in so many other panels. So to be appealing, what does the Gen Z want? Do you want change, opportunities, innovation? This is what they want.
They want a sense of belonging.
A sense
Our
of
research
belonging.
is always showing that the employees really want a sense of belonging. And here in the Middle East too, this is really important for employees.
Yes.
To have this sense of purpose, sense of belonging, appreciation.
Yes. So, and this is what the company, if I want to build an employee value proposition with a repetition that would make all the talents in the market, they would aspire to work for you. You need to build this with a certain narrative and a certain proposition, not haphazardly. It's not about being that you have an existence on social media. It's not about that. It's about the content that you do communicate in social media. So if you have the employee value proposition framework in place, this will definitely help in putting the company in the right position that you want. That will take you to a stage where when you do announce a job vacancy, the effort that you do to hire people becomes less and less and less because the number of people who would want to work with you is becoming bigger and bigger by time. So that's mainly the concept that has to be framed with a certain proposition to deliver the right message that you want to deliver. You want young people to work, you want professionals, you want to show that you have people who had a very good career progression within the company. So these are the things as examples of how this should be working, more or less.
And you were talking about the culture, and I think Hidayat, we were talking about how Tally had a learning culture. So how do you define what the right culture is for an organization? Because not all organizations would typically have the same culture. You actually need to link it somehow with what you believe in.
Thank you, Sonia. A few things I'd like to add. With branding and culture, they will be created anyway. So if we don't consciously think about which brand we want to create or which culture we want to create, a culture and a brand are going to be created, and when it's not conscious, it's usually not good. So if we leave our corporations without thinking of the brand and of the culture we want to create, it's usually quite toxic, it's usually quite, not attractive. One. Two, there is not one single size that fits all. So you might have good compensation, you might have, typically what an employee value proposition says, but this is not very suitable for your type of organization through this phase that you're going through. So for Tally, for instance, it's sort of a startup, not technically a startup because we are a subsidiary of Banque du Caire, so financially we're not a startup, but we're definitely in the build mode, and the build mode is very different from the run mode. For the build mode, we cannot afford the best pay. We don't yet have the best culture because these things require time to build. And so what we've done is we've asked employees, what do you think is good about Tally? Why are you guys joining? And they said 3 things. They said it's a learning organization, and it's a learning organization although we haven't done one training throughout the whole year that I've been with Tally. So there is no training, official training. But everybody in the company is coming from a different environment. And so there is a lot of learning taking place. The other thing is they said it's a family-like. We also have open space, and so it's extremely friendly. All managers are approachable, so that's a strength. The third thing they said was that we think Tally has a story, we think Tally has potential, and we want to be part of the founding members of this company because we know it's going to grow because of certain things. We took these 3 things and we've decided these are going to be part of our branding. So when you think about weaknesses and strengths, and then you focus on weaknesses, no, we focused on strengths because these are things we can actually capitalize on. We capitalized on these 3 things and they became a major part of our brand. And then we did what's now called endo-marketing, which is a new term for internal communication and external communication in that case for Gen Z. And it's very, very interesting how I think all the panels here spoke about generations. We never spoke about generations before. But now because generations are so different, because mainly of technology, we have to think about what this generation needs and what this generation wants and what this generation is looking for. And they're all good generations. There isn't one good generation and the rest are old, just saying. But it's worth thinking about for Tally. Again, the age distribution is quite young, but we are attracting every single generation. We don't mind. So it's not one size fits all. Now, coming to culture. Culture, I think it's the most difficult thing we can really have. And when we think about culture, I think about a few things. One is leadership, and we've heard a lot about leadership today, because leadership, culture is top-down. There is no way culture is going to be built unless we hire managers and leaders that have the core values we're thinking about. Core values are not only something that is one size fits all. You have to think about what you already have, you have to think about what you don't have and you really miss, and you also have to think about what exists and the strategy of the business in general. So for Tally, for instance, we are a startup. And so it's not very structured. It's very fast, but it's not very structured. Not all the processes are in place. Not all the business standards are in place. So collaboration is something that was very important. We needed people who can pull up their sleeves and dig in and do everything, wear 7, 8, 10 hats at a time. So this is something we were looking for. Another thing was persistence, for instance, because Tally, when you're a startup, you face many challenges that you would never even dream of if you are in a mature and settled organization. So this was something else. So even when you think about culture, it is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not like you want it to be a nice environment, you want it to have trust, you want it to have communityship, and so on and so forth. So it has to be very well thought, and it has to be thought. That's what I want to say. And then, one more thing, I know we're short on time probably, I'm quite talkative, sorry, is how to incorporate it into each and every function of HR. So when you're thinking performance, these core values are in there. And when managers actually appraise people, they have to appraise them on the core values. When you're hiring, this should be on the interview form. Are they aligned with the core values of their company? With reward, do we reward the people based on these core values? And so on and so forth. So it needs to be incorporated into every single aspect of HR. And one more thing is consistency. Because usually we think, let's make a brand, let's make an employee proposition, let's make a culture, and then and then we focus more on the business. This cannot be the case. It has to be consistent. It takes a very long time to create, to execute, and to maintain.
Okay, thank you, Hidayat. So moving on to the culture, we're talking at the end of the day about intangible things for the employer that he will make use of. So we'll move on to you, Ben, because in these times, training is one of these intangible benefits. Employees now want to see where they're going. They want to see where they'll be in another few years. And at the same time, traditional training isn't really working anymore, and we've heard that from all the panels we saw today. So how does upskilling and reskilling come into this formula? So how can that be used, and what's not being done properly? Because we've been hearing about upskilling for a few years, but the implementation of it is not really that easy. So what's your thoughts on this?
No, absolutely. And before I get started, so thank you very much indeed for inviting me today. An excellent collaboration with the EBI from Luxembourg. And I think that's really what I can bring a little bit to this panel, is just a slightly different perspective. I come from a different country. So I'm from Luxembourg, but we're working actively also in Egypt with financial services training programs. I think I'm coming to this panel with something about upskilling. It's very much the topic, but it's a very small piece. Well, sorry, it's not a small piece, but it's an important piece of what Emaine was talking about, and also the topic of branding. It fits in within that, and to join some of the dots that we've had today. Certainly the younger generations, they don't just turn up with demands at the front door and say, what is your salary, where do I sit? It's often, first question is, how are you going to develop me? And so I really think it's worthwhile just taking one little step back on what is exactly skilling. What are we talking about here? Now, in front of an L&D audience, I'm not going to take long. So basically, here at where I work at the House of Training, which is actually the Chamber of Commerce in Luxembourg, we have people who are turning up at the door without the fundamental skills, which of course is skilling and onboarding. When I joined what was formerly the IFBL, which was the Banking Training Academy of the Banks Association in Luxembourg, I joined in 2009, which was the time of the financial crisis. But just before that, we were running programs which were talking about reskilling, so reorientating people from other professions so they could join the financial sector. But after the financial crisis, we were really moving people sometimes in very, very different directions. Treasurers to become risk managers, and because that was the new opportunity. So really, really changing what they were doing. So reskilling as being something where you're on one particular career path and then you switch to something which is completely different. What we're really focusing on today is, of course, upskilling. And the ATTF, which we were actually sharing information coming from Luxembourg, we are very actively trying to find out what is it, those things that people absolutely need. How can we then go and provide those skills? But it's not just compliance. Okay, we're looking at competencies clearly. It's not just compliance. It's how do I implement a compliance framework? If you're in healthcare, it's not about becoming a different role. It's about how do I take on new techniques. So absolutely upskilling, taking people up to a new level. And I think really the challenge, and coming back to your question, is if you've got younger generations, I think it's just managing that process. Yeah. I think the echo I've been hearing all over the place is that the speed at which you can become a master of something is sometimes not quite as quick as some people believe. But I really want to come back to what you were talking about, motivation, because I think motivation to do training is where it all starts, and really just to become more autonomous in what people do, and that came from other panels, where you lose control. I found that a very important point on the last panel. We're finding people are losing control, and if they don't feel that they can handle their job properly, that's very, very important. So I think upskilling has an enormous role to play there, of making people's jobs doable. If you're a compliance officer in Luxembourg, it must have been a hellish ride over the last decade. I can't count the number of large pieces of important legislation that have come across their desks. How do they handle this? They need some help. And so again, much of it, the good news is that much of it they can get from their colleagues, but the rest of it they'll come and get from us. And if we can't provide that service, that's bad news. So I was starting on the the autonomy of it. The other ones maybe we'll have time to come back to later.
And I think, Iman, also we were talking about reskilling and having the basics of the skills to go to a different career.
I believe with the rapid changes that are taking place, and mainly in the technology field, and I believe that the technology has been it has been drastically moving. It is part of any organization. So I used to work in banking, but so many years back. The positioning or the existence of the technology was not as how it is right now with the financial institutions and everything. So it is the right time for reskilling. It is not only about upskilling. So there are so many jobs that are scarce jobs that we find it very difficult to hire, and other companies, the whole market is facing the same issue. So reskilling is a very good approach that also gives employees the opportunity to do something different, to see that the organization trusts and invests in their development, to do something different, to do a very, I would say, a crucial job within the organization. And this gives employees a good satisfaction within the organization. So, and it is, actually, it's a double-edged. So reskilling, it has one challenge that we were talking about, that having people to be reskilled, they have to have a certain level of knowledge of where you want to place them, because otherwise they will fail miserably. And if they fail, they would say, why did you do that to me? So the selection of people to get reskilled from which job to a new job, so the identification of the two jobs is very crucial. And I believe the discussion between the HR and the business is very essential for such an activity.
And I think, Hidayat, you must be one of those feeling this most, because technology in general is a very
Technology
dynamic.
is crazy. It's just crazy.
It's a dynamic environment.
And I thought we at Tally had this issue with hiring tech people. We were finding it very difficult to find tech people, but then all the surveys said the same thing. So
Yes.
because they go to Ireland, they go to the Gulf, they go to Saudi now with all the new projects that Saudi has. So it's exactly like the stock exchange. 1 month, this is what they're paid, and next month they paid something totally different. 1 year to the next year, it's like really crazy. And then again, we are facing another challenge, is that the product portfolio at Tally is unique. So we sell digital solutions, payment solutions. One of the products is like, one competitor, another product is like another competitor, but the whole product portfolio is very difficult to find someone in tech or in any other department actually that understands the whole industry. So there is a lot of upskilling required, and it really happens on the job. I have seen with my own two eyes in Tally, not in my previous organizations, how on-the-job training is the best form of development for employees. It's very hard to manage probably in large organizations because of the various reasons. But once you have to do it, it's really the best way people learn. And people love to learn. Gen Z loves to learn. All generations love to learn. So it's one of the very, very, very important things.
And just one compliment perhaps to that.
I was just going to ask you.
I did mention that I started in 2009, and we had lots of people who were really struggling to position themselves in the future market. And I think really it's exactly as Amin was just saying. You really have to support these things. And the further one job is from another, the more you have to rely on the employer taking you under their wing. It's almost like an apprenticeship, almost at the beginning. But of course, the older you get, the more difficult it becomes because you want to go with a higher price tag. And this is, of course, the problem that you're going to have in every market, that as someone moves into a new job, they want to take their price tag with them. So they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but they haven't got those competencies. And so, again, there's always going to be a bit of give and take. Do you have competencies for sale? So is the employee going to be flexible with their salary? But also on the other side, knowing that that person is coming in without competencies, is the employer going to be a little bit more flexible? And I think that's something that we've discovered in Luxembourg, is that if you can't find the right person, you're going to have to be flexible anyway. You've got to take second best, and then you've got to train them until they're first best, until you actually make that a good decision. So I think really, absolutely. And if you can find employers that have got the patience and the time to do that. I worry about the time in your digital world because there is no time. I get the impression, but that understanding and the taking someone under their wing.
Which takes
so
us back to
important for
empathy,
change.
actually. Which takes us back to empathy. Having empathy towards employees it must be part of the culture, because I was hearing Elon Musk a few days ago, and he was talking about how in his choice of people, he has always leaned towards people with the skills and the brains, and the more he's into business, he's leaning more towards people with the heart now, more than leaning people to, and he keeps falling into the same mistake, and he's saying that I need to remind myself it is people with the heart that I'm looking, especially leaders, that I need to hire. But Jack Welch actually said the same thing once, he said, I look for managers now that are generous. This is my number one competency that I'm looking in managers. I want generous managers because Gen Z are looking for communityship, they're looking for flexibility, they're looking for a company that cares. They need to feel that the company cares about them. And to be able to care, you need to listen. And to be able to listen, you need to have platforms that deliver the message, especially in big organizations, from the mass to people who can make decisions. And therefore, feedback is very important as well. It's all actually connected, Jan.
I think actually one of the very important messages I've heard in every single panel is the business has to really be an HR leader, and they have to implement all this. I mean, the HR puts the framework, but really the business leaders have to implement it. So without this partnership with the business leaders, things aren't going to really work. So like you were saying, hiring people with the heart, but you have to have the leaders who actually know what they're going to be implementing. They have to know the values. They have to know what culture they want to do. They have to know what type of programs they want to do in terms of reskilling and upskilling.
Can I say something?
Yes.
And in my
Go ahead.
opinion, this is the phase that Egypt is in now. Employees get into a company and they think, HR has to do this and HR has to do that and HR has to provide the environment and HR has to provide. And globally, the accountability is rightly so moving towards the managers. Not necessarily the business, but the people managers who should be accountable for creating this environment. We provide the tools, we provide the advice, we provide the support. We can provide the framework as well, but it's the people managers that are accountable for the culture, for the spirit, for the well-being of their staff. And this is what brings in best results by far.
So another topic that is growing, and our surveys actually say, we do an annual survey. So the annual survey talks about burnout, and it talks that burnout last year was 81%. So 81% of employees surveyed said they had a risk of burnout versus 60% in the previous year. So what kind of programs, Iman, in terms of wellness, or what type of programs do you do? Maybe you can tell us your experience regarding this, because it's becoming a really hot topic, and especially at the moment in the circumstances we're going on through in the Middle East and globally, it seems to be more and more important to think about this.
Yeah, there are so many topics that are discussed every day. It's the well-being, it's the psychological safety at work. And back to the point of that the managers, we give them the tools, we give them everything. We have actually a very big part of our leadership development is towards well-being and psychological safety. So people get introduced to new topics, new things that are not the traditional, topics of leadership. So that's one part. The other part that we have policies in place that is related to domestic violence, for example, and things like that. The last thing, we have a very brand new program that we've launched in Vodafone less than a year ago. It is a wellness program where any employee can have his own therapist to talk with in 100% confidentiality. Topics that are related to work, to personal, to anything that he wants. And actually, the decision to have such a program in place is driven by what you've said, that the burnout became very visible, that people actually collapse. And we started to see this after the pandemic very, very clearly, and having more of an awareness in the well-being space. And this is where an organization should react and should actually sometimes be proactive in those manners, seeing the trends, what other companies are doing, how the global changes are impacting the organization. So I believe if we look back 10 years, the topic of work from home, it did not exist. That's not an option. We used to go to the office 5 days a week, from 9 to 9, actually, not 9 to 5. And you don't know what you don't know. You didn't know that there was something that is called work from home. Yes. So now when it is there, people after the pandemic started to realize the importance of taking care of myself and being very conscious of how I feel, the burnout, I'm depressed, I'm good, I'm enthusiastic, I'm energetic to work. And this has to be taken care of in all the activities that we do at work. The Spirit Day, for example, our cultural program, that's one day, no meetings at all, and we do so many activities in the company. Okay. And one of them is learning. It doesn't have necessarily to be something like people playing ping pong, or because we have such stuff in the premises of the company. But I mean, even learning, that they have, like the space in mind, that they sit and they dedicate this time to learn something new. So,
well, actually, wellness now has evolved. So it's not only about health or physical wellness, mental wellness. It's also about financial wellness, which has been introduced recently. So programs teaching employees how to manage their finances, and social wellness. So Ben, have you done anything around training on financial wellness, seeing as you're from the financial
That's
training?
a very good question.
Yeah.
I travel around the world training courses in Basel, risk management, anti-money laundering, and all of these financial topics. But we're getting a lot more calls for now soft skills. I think this is going to occupy an ever larger piece of what we do. We are starting to export now things. So it's taking priority from IFRS 9, it's taking over from other things, and thankfully so. And just to join a few dots, I think it's, even if listening to the first panel, it was excellent to have that to set the scene. And it was very, very clear that the message has to come from the top down. We in training, there's nothing more disappointing. There's to develop a whole load of training, which takes time, effort, we roll it out, and it's hollow because it's got nothing to do with what the company's doing. Yes. So rather than saying, no, it's a strict line, no, it's a guiding line. You have to have an objective to training, otherwise it's pointless. The other thing that we also see is that this part of making the business accountable for what it does. We had a course which we were training up all the HR managers, but this ran out of steam after about 3 or 4 years. And then we created a course which was HR for line managers. So it absolutely resonates with that point that was made in one of the previous panels. And what do we find in one of those things? We find all the things that you were just talking about, which is breathing skills. Okay, I'm overloaded. I'm in the red. How do I handle this? How do I talk with different voices? How do I collaborate? And again, we put people through with different T-shirts, talking in different ways to people who have different communication skills. So this is absolutely invaluable. It's coming through. I wish we had enough time to do all of those things.
That's excellent.
It's and so I can only underline just how important it is. Yeah.
Hidayat, how about you? What's your experience with wellness programs?
Yeah, what comes to mind is that all the people, all the professionals in this room are fighting for the same people. It's all about competition. We all want the best. And the best in the past wanted money, and then they wanted training, and now they want to be in peace. They want work-life balance, and these demands are it's all about supply and demand, right? Yes. There isn't enough supply, even though Egypt has many people, but skilled, I would say a lot less. And therefore, we keep thinking about what else would attract. What is the brand? What is the proposition? What is the culture? We keep thinking about what is it that we need to have to be able to attract the type of people that we need at this stage of our life. And this is where well-being is coming in now, because the bases are not enough anymore. So we need to have something else.
Absolutely. So let me talk to the audience. Does anybody have a question for our panel? I think everybody's tired.
So it's time
It's
for
been a
food
long
now, huh?
day.
Lunchtime.
So, is there anything you'd like to add? I can ask you.
I can go if you like. I think coming into an audience like this and talking about training, it's like you're preaching to the converted. But with our experience in Luxembourg, we absolutely find the opposite. I think it was about 50% of companies turned around and said that the lack of competencies was the problem number one. But the same audience, when asked, it said, well, do you go to a training company to get any training? 36.6% said no. And another 41% said that they only do this on an occasional basis. Now, the good news is it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not getting any training, and indeed, probably 90% of training actually takes place on the job. And we heard that word as well, which was learning in the flow. And I think really what we're looking at is really building competencies. How do we do that? And I think really the message that I wanted to put across is that if you don't take training and it's not coming from the company itself, your staff are going to struggle. There's a lot that we can offer. And again, I'm not a local training provider with things to sell. There's so much help that they need, but they need good training. And that turns it round then to training providers, is they really have to concentrate on getting it right. Reduce those excuses. Oh, it takes too much time. It costs too much money. But when they're actually in the training room and the training course is of poor quality, that's a shame. And I think really, if competencies aren't on everybody's desk at the moment, it really should be lifted up in your list of priorities. But those are the things which are at the same time sometimes the most difficult to get, because, okay, I can say what are the competencies perhaps of a customer service rep, because such a profile has been around for a long time. But what do I say is that what are the key competencies for an AI prompter? That job hasn't existed yet. But then Luxembourg being very small, we have to get these skills coming. We've almost depleted the greater region around Luxembourg. 50% of the people that work in Luxembourg come across the border in the morning, and 70% are not Luxembourgers. Now, I know that people in Egypt cannot call on that same kind of resource pool. It means you have to go and develop these things.
I hope they're not coming from Egypt to Luxembourg.
No, they're not coming from Egypt, not that I'm aware of. But what do? We work with industry associations to go and pick their brains, and as quickly as we can put together competencies which we could then transform into a training, if it's needed. We don't do it for fun. So again, competencies, really looking at it, and no excuses if you're a training or entity for providing poor training. You've really got to do your best, and it's difficult.
It's very difficult. It's
Very
very
difficult.
Changing people, changing mindsets, changing, bringing in more flexibility. I think it's the hardest thing Egypt even is facing at the time being. You know, it's very easy to build bridges, but it's very hard to change the people.
Yeah, and I think the type of example is you'd say, well, I didn't like your training course because it hasn't got 120 slides. No, get with the beat. If it's a workshop, something which is allow a real expert also to experiment with new methods when they're training you. So again, I think everybody has to kind of rejig their programming just a little bit.
I think we can release everybody now, but is there any last words you'd like to add before you all go to lunch?
Just a small word. Change is the key. It is. If we keep on doing things the way we do, if we let people do things the way they do, we will
Absolutely.
definitely not move forward.
Yes,
That's
that's absolutely true. And
Yes.
change is so fast now
It
with
is.
the digitization, technology, and Gen Z. Things are so fast. We need to move ahead of these changes.
True.
I absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Hidayat, any last words?
Probably the same thing. If we all go home today thinking about what type of culture or what brand do I want my company to look like, that's one question that's going to prompt all the other actions. So.
I think in short, if you need training, do training, but also do things that work, and do things that are intuitive. Learn in the flow of work, do things that make sense. Train your colleagues if that works, but do things that work.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the panel. Thank you, EBI.
Thank you,
I think we'll release you now.